Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me this week. And today we are going to have a heart-to-heart about God's plan for the family. So come back. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, and we're going to have a heart-to-heart today talking about God's plan for the family. You know, we always, when we look at the cross, we talk about the fact that Jesus went to the cross and died for our healing so that we could be healed, so that we could be saved, so that we can spend eternity with Him, so that we can be prosperous and have His peace, and all those things are so true. But there's one thing I don't hear much talk about, and that is the fact that by Jesus going to the cross, what He did was He gave us believers the power. He gave us the power to walk in God's original plan for the family. Now, we have to understand, well, first of all, let me explain what original plan and original intent means. First of all, God had a plan for the family. God is the one who said it wasn't good for man to be alone. So what He did was He created Eve, who was Adam's helpmate. And so we have to understand that before Adam and Eve sinned, God already had placed his plan in effect. In other words, God's plan is His will. So when we want to understand what God's plan is for the family, we need to look at the way He established it in the beginning. And so the term original plan or original intent means how or what was God's plan or His original idea for the family. Well, the cross made it possible for us to walk in God's original intent, to walk in God's original plan for the family. Jesus dying on the cross, Him going to the cross, made it possible for a man to be a man. Jesus going to the cross made it possible for a woman to be the woman that God intended her to be, as well as for man to be the man that God intended him to be. So this morning, I want to just share some things with you to give you an understanding of what God's plan is. And this is something you also have to understand. Original intent or God's original plan, even though man sinned and fell from that, God's plan hasn't changed. That's why we have the cross. That's why Jesus came and died and bore our sins on the cross, because it's sin is what's stopping us from walking in God's original intent and plan. Sin and the flesh and the devil, those things, but Jesus conquered the devil. Jesus gave us power over the flesh. I mean, He did everything for us so that we can experience and taste heaven on earth here in family, in marriage relationships. So let's look at that. First and foremost, what God does first establishes order, and it establishes what God's plan is. So what did God do? God made Adam first. Then He made Eve. Now, just because Adam was made first, that doesn't mean that Eve was not equal to Adam. As a matter of fact, even in order, there's also equality. So when God made Adam and He made Eve, there was equality. That was God's plan. And how would this equality work? Well, I'll talk a little bit about it a little bit further on. Now, when Adam moved outside of God's order, because God's order, husband, wife, He made man to have dominion, have authority to rule and to reign, and the woman was his helpmeet. When man moved outside of God's order, what happened was the curse comes in. When any man a couple, when any couple, any man in a marriage relationship moves out of the order that God established him to walk in and the authority that God established him to walk in, what happens is the curse comes in. The blessings of God always, and understand this and know this, the blessings of God always come when we are walking in God's order. The blessings come whenever God's order is in fruition, is enforced. Now, man, when God created man to be the priest, the protector, the provider, but he also created him to be father. Now, what are we seeing in society today? We're seeing lawlessness. We're seeing criminal acts. We're seeing so many things negatively happening in society. And you have to understand that the family is the foundation for society. It's many families is what makes society. So what do we see today? We see lawlessness abounding in society. Why is that? Because men, a couple things. Because number one, men are becoming fathers before they're becoming husbands. You cannot be a good father until you're a good husband. That is so important for you to understand. And you have to understand this as well. It's against nature for a man to be a father before he's a husband. It's prohibited. It's totally contrary to God's plan. It's contrary to God's original intent. What was God's original intent? Adam, Eve, then children. Not Adam, then children. No. God's original plan was Adam and Eve. The Bible tells us the two became one, and from the two becoming one, that's when children come. That's procreation. Anything outside of that order, there's no blessing in it. The curse is actually there. The curse is actually existing. As a matter of fact, to be brutally frank and honest with you, when you work and operate outside of God's order, you give the devil, you give your enemy license to operate, to destroy, to steal, and to kill. So what do we have today? When a man has children outside of the order that God established, what do we have? Because that breaks God's original plan. So what we have is we have children that are born into this earth who have identity problems. These children, they don't know who they are. They don't know their purpose. They become people pleasers because they don't know their purpose. They don't know who they are. They don't know who they're supposed to be. Men, listen, and today I'm talking to you men, I'm talking to you fathers, and I'm talking to you women, I'm talking to you mothers. Men, you are responsible for what you give birth to. You are responsible for what you bring into this earth. And whenever you go outside of God's order, whenever you go outside of God's original plan, what happens is the curse comes in. So it's important that you establish order in your home. And some of you are saying, well, I already did it wrong. How do I correct it? And we'll get to that. So what do we have? We have people, adults, men and women who don't know who they are. So consequently, what we have is women looking to men for their identity because they didn't have a father who was supposed to tell them who they're supposed to be. Because a lot of times what happens in these relationships where a man has children outside of marriage is the children end up with the mother. But the identity comes from the cohesiveness of the mother and the father working together. But the crucial part comes when the father is around. And most of the times where you have families that are birthed by a man over here and a woman over there, many times the children live with the women. Consequently, the children they're not able to get their identity. They're not able to know who they are and to walk in the authority of who they are. God first established order, then his plan. God made man first. That is so important for you to understand. Now, something else you need to understand is, man, I'm talking to you right now. Adam was made outside of Eden. Eve was made inside. So what am I saying? Eve was made inside Eden. So what am I saying? Adam had a home to put Eve in. He had a home to put his wife in. So what's happening today in society? Today, society, women are providing for men. So what do we have happen? What happens? Because men, you have abdicated your responsibility. What you do is you go and you live with a woman. And let me tell you this, nothing is worse than getting a woman angry. Because when you get her angry, you know what she's going to tell you? She's going to tell you, pick up your stuff, and some of them won't even let you do that. And she'll tell you, get out of what? Her house. Her house. Here again, let's go back to original intent. Adam had a place for his wife, Eve. It wasn't the opposite. It wasn't the exact opposite. Adam provided a place for his wife, Eve. So in society today, what are we seeing? We're seeing women are now wearing the pants. And the men, and I know some of you are going to get angry and offended, but I'm speaking the truth. The truth hurts, but it'll set you free if you receive it. The women today are wearing the pants, but the men, you're wearing bras. That's what you're doing. You're wearing bras because you are now submitting. You're passive aggressive. You're submitting to a woman, and that's out of God's order. And as a result of that, the curse is in. You're homeless. What you do is what happens when she puts you out, you end up going back home to mommy. That's not God's plan. As a matter of fact, this is what God says. And I'm going to read it to you. He says that the man is supposed to leave in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It says, this is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one flesh. You're supposed to leave. You should never, when you're married, you never go back home. You cling and you cleave to your wife and you become one flesh. So what we have here is in society, again, realizing that society is made up of families. And because the families and the order in the families are out of order, we have so many different things, so many deviations, so many deviant things happening. So we have the woman acting in the man's role, and as a result of that, women, you need to hear this. When you take up your husband's role, when you take on your husband's responsibility, what you do is you open up the door for an evil spirit to come in. And consequently, there's the control issue. You start to control. And what happens is your husband, he starts to back off. He becomes passive aggressive. As a matter of fact, what's even worse is when women, you take over and you start to control, what you do is you weaken your husband. He becomes indecisive. He becomes unsure of himself, and he ends up with an identity crisis. So it's important that you realize, women, that your place is not to rule and reign in the home. You're the helper. You're supposed to help. You complement. You don't rule. The minute you start to rule, evil spirits start to come in, and they will work. Guess how? They're going to work through you. Now, let's keep going. Men, your measurement of manhood is not how good you are in bed. It's neither how many children you produce. Far from it. When you do that, actually, when you go outside of God's order and you have children all over the place, or you have several children with one woman, it doesn't matter. When you do it outside of God's plan, men, you are corrupting your seed. you're messing up your bloodline. And it's important you understand that. You're causing problems for your seed. You're messing up your bloodline. Today, my prayer is that you realize that what I'm saying is true. You accept it as truth and you say, enough is enough. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to bring order into my home, and I'm going to bring God's order. Today, men, you need to say, and women, you need to say, today, order is coming into our home. It's so important. So how do we measure manhood? How do we measure a man's manhood? This is how. It's based on responsibility. It's based on responsibility and knowing how to handle it. When you take responsibility for your authority, that's the key, man. You have to take responsibility for the authority that God gave you in the beginning. If you look in the Word of God, He tells the man, He says that you're supposed to have dominion. He says, be fruitful, multiply, subdue, fill the earth, subdue it, rule. That's what God told man. That's what you're supposed to do. And when you become responsible for the authority that God gave you in the beginning and you bring order, you see, when you take responsibility for your authority, that's when order comes into your life. That's when the blessings of God come into your life. Many of you today, you're not blessed. You don't have the peace you need to have. You're worried. You're strained financially. You have so many things going on in your mind and in your life. Why? Because you don't have order in your home. Once you bring the order into your home, men, first and foremost, being the priest of your home, then you're going to find a lot of these issues that you have, they're going to fall by the wayside. So it's important that you take responsibility for your authority, the authority that God has given you. Problems arise when you men push the woman in front of you. God did not call the woman to be in the front. She called you men and women to walk side by side. God set the order in the beginning. He made man first. But even though He made man first, someone had to come first. There was equality because He told them both to work together, rule, submit, replenish, multiply. He told them both, but man has the lead. And I'm going to prove it to you if you look at what happened when Adam and Eve sinned, but I'm going ahead of myself. I want to take this slowly and I want to take it in order so that you can get on board with God's plan, because you know what? It's not until you get on board with God's plans that you're going to be blessed. It's not until you men that are watching this program get on board with God's plan that society will change. I want you to also pay attention to this. Because society is turned upside down and they've actually come outside of God's order. Because society has come outside of God's order, this is what you have. You have people in office trying to govern, trying to rule other people, and they don't even have rule over their own lives. What do you think that produces? It produces chaos. Elections are a time that's very important for us as people. Because elections, the Bible tells us that the powers that be are ordained of God. So having people in office to rule and to govern, more so the word is govern over us, is really important. But because God's order is not established in families, what we have happening is we're continually putting people in office who can't even rule and order their own lives. And so until we get order in the home, we won't be able to put the right people into office. What's happening is we're putting the same old thing back in office. Different faces, a different face, but the same thing. People that can't rule themselves. If you can't rule yourself, how dare you think you can rule me? How dare you think you can rule people? You have to be able to rule yourself first. Now, what I'm going to say next is hard, but it's truth. Many Christians are outlaws today. You're outlaws, and the reason for this is because you're working against God's laws of original intent in the family. Men wanting to control and step on their wives. Women want to control their husbands in Christian homes. That's outlaw. That's lawlessness, and that's not God's plan, and that's why you're not blessed. We have to come back into God's original plan. We have to come back into God's order for success and the blessings of God to come into our lives. The Word of God says that the blessings of God, it makes you rich and it adds no sorrow. Well, if you're experiencing sorrow in your family, well, you need to look at the order. As a matter of fact, I'll share this with you. Statistics show that in Christian homes, it's 70% of Christian homes are run by women. And in those homes, what you find is you have women controlling the men. The children don't know who they are. The children get into alternative lifestyles. And let me share this with you too. An alternative lifestyle is not just shacking up with someone or homosexuality. No. In addition to those things, an alternative lifestyle is when you have a woman ruling over a man. That's an alternative lifestyle from God's plan. And so that's what we have happening today. And I'm speaking to you Christians. If you're living that way, you're married and you're women, you're controlling the home and you're controlling your husband, you're Jezebel. You're acting like Jezebel because Jezebel was a control freak. And you're acting like her. And look at what happened to Jezebel. She lost her life. She lost everything. And that's what's going to happen to you if you continue to control your husband. You have to let him go. Let go and let God work in your husband so he can be the man that God created him to be. Now, men, this is to you men. Just because you feel hormonal, and let me just say this way, just because you feel sexual, that doesn't mean that you're ready for marriage. It won't last if you're moving based on your hormones. This is the type of marriage that lasts. When you know your assignment, when you know your purpose, when you know what God has, when you actually searched out what God has placed in your heart and you're walking in it, that's when you're going to be successful. And as a matter of fact, when you're walking in God's purpose, men, you're going to find the right woman. Because, and I'll tell you why. When you're walking in God's purpose, you're seeing everything in line and in light of God's purpose. So consequently, what's going to happen is you're going to see and recognize that woman, the woman that God has to walk with you, because she will recognize your purpose and she'll come and walk with you in fulfilling God's purpose. If you are fulfilling your purpose, God will bring the right person to you. That person is going to fit your purpose. So if you marry for sexual reasons, that has nothing to do with purpose. That has to do with lust. So what's going to happen is eventually the sex is going to get old and you're going to go your separate ways. The person, if you're fulfilling and walking in God's purpose for your life, God is going to bring the right person, and he or she, what they will do is they will fit with the purpose that God has called you to. And understand this too. Your purpose is more important than need. You should not get a spouse. You should not marry a person based on need. You should be marrying according to purpose. And why is that? Because need is temporary. Purpose is eternal. When you stand before God, he's going to ask you, have you fulfilled the purpose, the eternal purpose I placed within you? That's what he's going to ask you. And so you're going to have to answer, well, yes, God, I did. And I had the right helpmate because I was walking in your purpose. The right helpmate came and I was able to fulfill it. And let me share this with you too. Until you're married to the right person, you won't fulfill your purpose. So that's why it's so important. You don't marry according to need. You marry according to purpose. And it's important that you're walking in God's purpose before you marry a person. As a matter of fact, let me share the scripture with you. I believe it's in Proverbs chapter 24, maybe around verse 27, 28. The Bible tells us to first establish your profession. First establish your business. If your purpose, if God has called you to establish a business, if God has called you to be a professional, whether it's medicine or law or owning your own business, whatever it is, you establish that first. And what happens? Here again, you're going to get blessed. Why? Because that's God's plan. His plan is for you to establish your profession before you get married. Why? Because your profession will take care of your family. Okay? That's so important. Because your profession, in building your profession, there are times when you're going to be working longer. There are times when you're going to have to go different places. You see, when you don't have a spouse and you're fulfilling your profession, then when your profession is established, the spouse comes along, and what happens? Your profession will take care of your spouse. Less traveling, maybe no traveling. Success in business. Why? Because you're doing it God's way. So you establish your profession first. You establish your purpose first. God will bring the right person in the time that you're ready. So that is so important. Don't get married out of need. Don't get married out of lust. Get married because you're fulfilling your purpose. And the person that God brings to you, they will help you to fulfill that purpose. So here again, I want to share this with you. It should be, you should marry according to purpose, not according to need. Because need is temporary, but purpose is eternal. Okay? So I want to share that with you. And listen, the things that I shared with you today, it'll change your life. It'll bring you back into God's original intent. And listen, don't run off and divorce your wife. No. Don't run off and divorce your husband because you're not seeing it, because you're not in line with what I shared. No. This is what's so amazing, and this is what's so powerful. Prayer. The power of prayer. You pray in your prayer language before God. You break the power of the devil from over that person, and you pray God's will into that person's life. That person will change, and the purpose that God has for them, they'll recognize it, they'll see it, they'll start to walk in it, and the two of you will become one in purpose, and God will be able to bless that. So listen, God has a great plan for you. Seek first His purpose, and then He'll bring the right person to help you fulfill it in total. God bless you. Have a wonderful week.